Welcome to The Witch's Tales, where you will be immersed in stories of mystery, magic, and drama. Prepare yourself to face unexplained mysteries, bizarre phenomena, and strange adventures that will keep you glued to your eyes. With a captivating voice, we will take you into the world of thrilling stories, where truth and legend collide, making you wonder if everything is really just fiction. The Haunting in the Wilderness. I had just finished a long, exhausting day. My shoulders felt weighed down, as if I were carrying the weight of the world. The moving truck had left just as the sun was setting, taking the last of my things to storage until I found somewhere more permanent to settle. All that was left were a few boxes sealed up and scattered across the room. Stuff I had packed, but now couldn't quite remember doing. That's when I saw them, 6 dark shapes no bigger than house cats, but moving in a way that wasn't quite natural. They circled my coat in perfect synchronization. It was eerie. Shadows don't behave like that, not on their own. These weren't shadows. These things seemed to absorb the light from the bulb above, pulling it into themselves, leaving the room darker where they moved. My heart slammed against my chest as I blinked, sure my exhausted mind was playing tricks on me. But when I opened my eyes again, they were still there, gliding around my brown leather coat over and over, as if caught in an endless loop. The temperature in the room plummeted by at least 10 degrees, and goosebumps shot up my arms. I had to look away desperately, trying to focus on the boxes around me, anything to distract from those things. That's when I heard it, a soft, muffled laughter. It was coming from the sealed boxes. Tiny voices trapped inside seemed to be mocking my fear, laughing at me. I froze, unable to do anything. The laughter continued, growing louder, more distinct. It wasn't just a single voice, but a chorus of whispers, some high and nasally, others low and guttural, all of them amused, as if they had been waiting for this moment. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling, maybe the pipes groaning from the change in temperature. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't deny what was happening. I had bought this house 3 months ago, drawn in by its charm and the seller's eagerness to close the deal fast. Too fast, I now realized. The previous owner, Margaret Holloway, had lived here for nearly 50 years before she moved to a care facility. Her nephew had been vague when he described her condition, mentioning she had become more and more isolated over the years, talking to people who weren't there. He warned me about a few things. I should have paid more attention to the basement door that wouldn't stay closed, the odd creaks in the floorboards, even when no one was walking on them, the occasional electrical issues the inspector couldn't explain. Standard old house problems, he had assured me with a nervous laugh. Now, standing in the center of this empty room, surrounded by whatever it was that had been unleashed, those warnings didn't feel like helpful advice anymore. They felt like desperate attempts to offload a curse. I tried to focus on the boxes, trying to ignore the dark shapes still dancing around my coat. But as I moved, they stopped, and I felt their attention shift toward me like a sudden weight pressing down on my chest. The house groaned beneath me, as if it were alive, reacting to the presence of these things. Somewhere in the walls, I heard something tapping, drumming an impatient rhythm that made my skin crawl. The overhead light flickered, casting wild shadows that danced independently of anything I did. Every instinct told me to run, but something kept me rooted in place, paralyzed As the laughter from the boxes continued, my hands began to shake so badly I had to curl them into fists just to stop the tremors. I was frozen, caught between fear and the inexplicable pull to understand what was happening. The next few moments felt like hours. I had no idea why I reached for my coat, but I did. The second my fingers touched the leather, the laughter stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence. But then the smell hit me. At first it was faint, barely there, like old flowers left in stagnant water. But within seconds it grew stronger, more pungent, more unbearable. The sickly sweetness of decay mixed with something metallic twisted in my stomach. I pressed my sleeve to my nose, but the scent seemed to seep through the fabric directly into my brain. That's when the room changed. The walls didn't shift physically, but they felt wrong, like the angles of the room had shifted when I wasn't looking. The ceiling seemed lower, the corners sharper. The space felt smaller, more confining, as if the very geometry of the room was bending around me. I backed toward the door, eyes darting between the dark shapes, still watching from the corners. They moved when they thought I wasn't looking, sliding along the walls with liquid grace. Shadows that didn't belong, shapes that couldn't be explained. The air thickened, suffocating me. I fumbled for the door handle. My hands were slick with sweat, my fingers slipping on the brass knob. Just as I thought I might make it out, I heard the voices again, now not in the boxes, but from somewhere deeper, within the walls, urgent whispers in languages I didn't understand. Words in English slipped through the cracks, hunger, waiting, promises broken. I gripped the door handle harder, turning it with all my strength, but it didn't budge. The door felt welded shut. Panic surged through me, sending a wave of cold electric shock through my body. I could hardly breathe, my chest tightening with each failed attempt to escape. I felt myself hyperventilating, the edges of my vision darkening as I struggled to think. One of the shapes passed right under my feet, its cold so intense it felt like frostbite. My legs buckled. I staggered backward, the weight of the coat pulling at me until I found myself pressed against one of the sealed boxes, and then the silence. It was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud, insistent, echoing in the space. The next sound I heard came from behind me, a voice clear and too familiar, speaking from nowhere. "You can't leave yet," it said. "We're not finished with you." I spun around, expecting to see someone, but found only empty air. The voice had come from inside the box itself, as though someone was trapped within. Without thinking, I reached for the tape that sealed it shut. The voice warned me not to, but I was too far gone. I had to understand. I tore at the tape, breaking my nails against the adhesive, and the moment I lifted the first flap, a cold rush of air hit me, followed by a scent, soil roses, something faintly familiar. Inside the box I found photographs, dozens of them. But they weren't ones I remembered packing. They were of the house, taken at different times, decades apart. And in every single one there, they were dark shapes, hovering in corners, and doorways always present, but never fully visible. In the most recent photos, I saw Margaret Holloway herself, frail and ancient, sitting in what used to be my living room, surrounded by the same 6 dark entities. And in the photos, she was smiling at them, reaching out as though they were pets. At the bottom of the box, I found a letter addressed to the next resident. The handwriting was shaky old Margaret's. My hands shook as I unfolded the letter, but I could barely read it. When I did, the words hit me like a cold wave. "They've been with this house longer than anyone remembers the letter said. They don't mean harm, they're just lonely. At first they fed on my fear, then my company. By the end, I was grateful for their presence. At least I was never alone. You have a choice. You can fight them, and they'll grow stronger. You can flee, and they'll follow. Or you can accept what this house offers. She had chosen acceptance, and now someone else had come to take her place. As the letter dropped from my hands, understanding crashed over me. This wasn't a haunting, it was a transaction. I wasn't just another owner of this house, I was part of its cycle. And as I looked around, I knew the truth. This house had always had a keeper. And now, it would be me. The story begins on a surprisingly quiet morning. I was standing in front of the kitchen, looking at the old refrigerator, and couldn't remember what I had done. Feeling tired and stressed, I couldn't continue with my normal work. That's when I started to hear a slight whistling sound, like a wind blowing through the house. At first, I thought it was the glass door shaking, but then I heard a steady breathing sound, as if someone was standing right behind me. My heart pounded. I turned around and saw no one. But that feeling still followed me. As the night went on, the noises became clearer. Unheard footsteps, the clanking of household objects, and especially a familiar sound. The lullaby that my grandmother used to sing when she cooked. It was a song from my childhood, a warm and gentle song, but this time it had a strange melody, as if it was spreading in my own mind. I tried to convince myself that I was just tired, but then I noticed that my grandmother's old mixing bowl, which I had left in the corner of the kitchen, had suddenly reappeared, complete as before. The cookies which my grandmother had made whenever I missed home were baking in the oven. The scent of butter and vanilla filled the air, and in that moment, I realized that this feeling was not an illusion. Something was very strange, and I knew I couldn't ignore it. I followed the strange footsteps through every corner of the house, where strange tracks began to appear. Strange footprints covered in dirt and dust led me to the bedroom, a place I no longer dared to enter after the strange events. There was no one in the room, only the long, silent footprints into the darkness. I felt a deep sadness, as if my grandmother was still somewhere continuing the old cycle, where she lived in her own memories. But the strangeness didn't stop there. One day, I discovered an old photo of my grandmother in a book, a photo of her in the kitchen, where she stood and smiled. However, the lighting in the photo was wrong, as if my grandmother was not just standing in the photo, but seemed to be looking at me from there. This feeling kept haunting me, as if she hadn't left, but was just trying to make me understand something I hadn't thought of. So I decided to find out about this house. It turned out that the previous owner of the house, a ceramic artist named Elena, had lived here for nearly 40 years before she passed away. What I didn't know was that she had created a large sculpture ahead, but she never finished it because Alzheimer's had caused her to lose her memories and the spirit of it. After I found the statue, things began to become clear. Elena was not a lost soul, but a person who was finding herself. Day after day, I lived with these strange phenomena, learning to live with them, until one night, Elena appeared in the kitchen as if she had found what she had lost. In the dim light, I witnessed her find peace in a space that had previously been filled with nostalgia and grief. And I understood that there are connections that cannot be broken even when a person is gone. Love and memories sometimes are not things we have to let go of. These things will stay with us even if they may come from places we cannot explain. The tension in this passage is palpable, creating a sense of unease that intensifies as the supernatural elements slowly build. As the protagonist tries to make sense of the inexplicable events, the details create a creeping dread, particularly the gradual realization that the disturbance isn't just in his mind. It's as if the house and the space itself has taken on an eerie presence, manifesting the manifestation of his stress and fear. There's a strong sense of foreboding with the protagonist's descent into paranoia. The physical sensations, tightness in the scalp, the sudden coldness, the pull on the ponytail are all visceral details that amplify the horror. The imagery of the shadow with its long, distorting limbs and hollow face in the reflection echoes the suffocating presence of something alien and sinister, something that exists between the waking world and sleep. The story deepens as the protagonist interacts with reality in a disjointed manner. The house, the vibrations, and the unexplainable events surrounding the staircase create an unshakable impression that this is no longer just a mind unraveling under pressure, but something darker, something beyond human comprehension. The ultimate question raised in this scene is whether the protagonist is truly losing his mind, or if there's a deeper, more sinister force at work operating through the very fabric of the building itself. The eerie sequence of events, from the broken lock mechanism to the vibrating handrail, reinforces the idea that some forces transcend logic and explanation. The sense of being watched, the distortion in the space behind him, and the change in the atmosphere are clear indications that the protagonist is being manipulated by something or someone he cannot see or fully understand. His attempt to dismiss it as stress-induced hallucinations only strengthens the eerie feeling that there's more lurking within his environment, and the lines between reality and his mental state are blurring in unsettling ways. Sense of comfort. The haunting that once filled the house with fear has transformed into a soft, lingering presence of beauty and creation. What began as a terrifying, ghostly disturbance has evolved into a peaceful connection with the past, an artist's devotion to her craft, transcending death. The protagonist's journey through fear, confusion, and stress mirrors Elena's own struggle with Alzheimer's, where her memory faded, but the work and the love she poured into her creations remained, waiting for recognition and completion. This story intertwines the concepts of loss and healing, illustrating how something intangible, like love for one's work, or the preservation of memories, can persist even after death, often in unexpected ways. The act of restoring Elena's pottery collection, bringing it back to the house, was more than just an effort to quell the supernatural occurrences. It was about honoring her legacy, offering closure to the restless spirit. The sculpture, a physical representation of Elena's fragmented self, symbolizes the completion of her journey not just in the form of art, but in her own personal reconciliation with the life she led and the woman she had once been. By taking care of her work, the protagonist helps Elena's spirit find peace, and in doing so, transforms his home into a place of healing, where even the darkness and the eerie vibrations can be seen not as malice, but as echoes of love that never truly dies. That the final stage of the experiment would involve direct psychological manipulation. The goal was to break me to see how much pressure I could withstand before I shattered. He spoke calmly, as if explaining a standard procedure, but his words sent a cold shiver down my spine. I wasn't just a subject anymore. I was a specimen, something to be dissected and observed under clinical precision. With chilling nonchalance, Eugene revealed how he had been monitoring me not only through the notes, but also through hidden cameras and microphones, feeding data back to his unseen colleagues. The sensation I'd felt of being watched, the footsteps I'd heard, the odd noises in the building, it had all been part of the plan. I wasn't just paranoid. I had been watched, actively surveilled by professionals conducting a ruthless experiment on my mental health. He admitted to the lengths they had gone to rearranging my apartment, tracking my movements, analyzing every detail of my life, to understand how someone in a situation like mine would break. It was all an experiment in environmental stress responses, with me as the unwitting lab rat. The worst part was how easily they had manipulated my mind, how effectively they had induced the paranoia, the anxiety, and the constant terror. His smile was predatory, as he told me that I had made it further than most. Most subjects broke long before Phase 3. They gave in to fear, to isolation, to the crushing weight of the surveillance. But I, it seemed, had a will that kept me going longer than expected. This only made him more eager to proceed. As he spoke, I felt my anger boil over. How dare he? How could they do this to someone? The realization hit me with the force of a blow. Eugene wasn't just a neighbor. He wasn't just a creepy figure with too much time on his hands. He was a part of this twisted, calculated plan. And now that I knew there was no going back, but I wasn't going to let them break me. I grabbed my phone, making sure the recording was still running, and stood tall. "This ends now," I said, my voice shaking but determined. "You don't get to control me anymore. I will expose you. I will bring this to light, every detail of your sick little experiment." The smirk on Eugene's face remained, but there was something else behind it. Now, something more predatory, more dangerous. I could feel it. The walls of my apartment, which had once seemed like a safe haven, now felt like a trap closing in around me. Eugene was no longer just a man across the hall. He was part of a much larger web of control, and I had unknowingly been ensnared in it. He warned me that I couldn't stop Phase 3, that it would be too late now. His words were like a promise, a threat, and the air around me seemed to grow heavier with every syllable. As he turned to leave, I knew one thing for certain: I was no longer just a participant in the experiment. I was going to fight back. I didn't know how, but I wasn't going to let them win. Not like this. That night, I locked every door, every window. I checked every corner of my apartment for hidden cameras or microphones. My entire world had turned into a battlefield, and I was on the front lines. And even though fear still clung to me like a second skin, I had one advantage now: knowledge. I knew what they were trying to do, and that meant I had a chance to stop it. But one thing still haunted me. Could I really fight against the people who had orchestrated this madness, who had been watching me every step of the way? And more importantly, what would happen if I couldn't? If their plan worked and I finally broke? Would I ever be the same? Again, normal animal. The prints are too large, too defined, and there's a faintness to the edges, as if they were made by something with no real substance, something otherworldly. The outline of each hoof is blurred, distorting at the edges like smoke, left in the shape of a tangible form. They aren't real, or at least they shouldn't be. A chill crawls up my spine, and I fight the urge to run back into the house and lock every door behind me. But something compels me to stay, to look closer at these strange markings, despite the growing terror clawing at the back of my mind. The prints continue to encircle the veranda, as if whatever left them is waiting for something or someone. The metallic stench, thick and foul, rises from the dust beneath my feet, clinging to the air like a promise of something worse to come. I kneel down to examine the hoof prints more closely, and that's when I hear it, a low, wet breath behind me. It's not the sound of wind through the trees, nor the usual night creatures. This is different. A breath too slow, too deliberate. I freeze. My skin prickles with the unmistakable sensation of being watched, but I don't dare turn around. Every instinct tells me that whatever is behind me isn't just an animal or the product of my imagination. It is something else entirely. I stand slowly, my legs shaking as I straighten up. The air grows colder still, and the metallic taste in my mouth intensifies. The hoof prints, now unmistakably real in their grotesque perfection, begin to fade as I take one step backward, then another. Then I hear it hooves striking wood once more, but this time from the other side of the veranda, directly opposite from where I had first seen them. The sounds are deliberate, methodical, and echo with a hollow resonance. It's like something is moving just beyond the veil of the visible something that is waiting for me to react. I don't know what it wants or why it's here, but I know one thing for sure: I'm no longer alone. And whatever it is, it's not going away. With every step, the silence grows heavier, more oppressive. I turn to look at the house behind me, and I realize with a jolt that the door I had left slightly ajar is now fully open, as if inviting me back inside. But I don't want to go there. I don't want to be trapped in that space, in that house where I can hear the breathing again, or the hooves coming ever closer, circling, waiting. My heart pounds in my chest as I take one final glance at the veranda. The hoof prints the darkness beyond, and I make a decision. Without another second of hesitation, I turn and sprint toward the door, slamming it shut behind me with more force than I knew I had. But even as I lock it and breathe a shallow sigh of relief, I know the truth. It's not the door that keeps things out. Not anymore. And it's not just the hoof prints, the breathing, or the shadows on the walls. It's what they've left behind, what they've planted in the air in my mind that I can't shake. I am marked. I don't know by what or why, but I know I'll never escape it. Not now, not ever. And as I sit back against the door, trying to force my breathing to steady, I understand something that terrifies me even more. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. But the feeling of being watched never left. Every footstep echoed in my mind as I made my way down the sidewalk, my nerves stretched taut, as if expecting something to reach out from the shadows. I reached my car, quickly unlocking it with shaky hands, and as I slid into the driver's seat, I glanced at the rearview mirror. There he was, the man from the restaurant, standing at the corner of the lot, leaning casually against a lamppost, staring straight at me. My breath caught in my throat. How long had he been following me? I tried to steady myself. It was just paranoia, I told myself. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe he just happened to be walking this way. But the logical part of my mind, the part that had been piecing things together for days, knew better. I started the car and pulled out of the lot, glancing at the mirror every few seconds. The man remained on the corner, unmoving, his eyes still locked on me. My heart raced as I drove, turning left and right, down the busy city streets, trying to shake him, trying to lose him. But no matter where I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, just out of sight. I took random turns, drove through unfamiliar neighborhoods, and even circled a few blocks to see if he would appear again. But he didn't. The city began to feel smaller, each street narrowing, each shadow growing larger. My mind raced. Was it him? Was he really following me, or had my paranoia simply reached a new level? I didn't know what to believe anymore, but I had to be sure. After an hour of aimless driving, I finally pulled into a parking garage near my apartment. I parked, turned off the car, and sat there for a moment, staring at the dashboard. Then, I heard it the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I snapped my head toward the entrance of the garage. There, standing at the entrance, was the man from the restaurant. I was trapped. The terror that surged through me was palpable, but I did the only thing I could think to do. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police. I couldn't speak. My voice was frozen, trapped in my throat, but I managed to hit the number for 911. The dispatcher's voice came through clear and calm, but I couldn't form the words. He was getting closer now, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he knew exactly how much fear he was stirring inside me. His face was partially obscured by the cap, but I could still see the slight curve of a smile, the satisfaction that danced in his eyes. And then, just as he was about to step forward, he stopped. A long pause, an eerie silence. I didn't understand what was happening until I saw it. The flash of a device in his hand. A small black object, almost too familiar. The GPS tracker? He'd been watching me. The same way I had found it on my car in the parking lot, now it was in his hand, held up to the light as if it were a trophy. It felt like everything had come full circle, and I had no way out. "Did you really think you could run from this?" he asked, his voice low but clear, with a chilling finality that sent a shiver down my spine. And just like that, I realized no matter where I went, no matter what I did, he would always find me. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun. Chill that had settled into my bones after he spoke those words. It was the same smile I had seen in the restaurant, the same unsettling recognition in his eyes. I tried to convince myself it was all just a product of stress, that I had misinterpreted the situation, but deep down, I knew the truth. He was the one. I couldn't sleep that night. Every shadow in my apartment seemed to move. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps, and every car that passed outside felt like it was driving too slowly, too deliberately. My phone stayed close to my finger, hovering over the 911 button, ready to call again if I needed to. I tried to tell myself it was over, that the police had cleared things up, that I was just overreacting. But the next day, another message arrived. This time, it was in the form of a text. "I'm still here, Marcus. Watching. Waiting. You can't escape me. We'll finish what we started." My stomach dropped. I knew then that it wasn't over. It hadn't been a misunderstanding. It wasn't just paranoia. This man, David Chen, had been stalking me, orchestrating this elaborate game of control and fear. He wasn't done yet. The next few days passed in a blur of anxiety and dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched even in the most mundane of settings. I couldn't escape the sensation of his eyes on me, no matter where I went or what I did. The message from the night before still echoed in my mind like a constant whisper that wouldn't go away. I considered leaving, packing up, and starting over somewhere new, but I knew it wouldn't matter. He would find me. He would always find me. The more I thought about it, the more it became clear I couldn't escape. Not physically, not emotionally, and not mentally. He had already claimed his hold on me. The worst part was the realization that I had no one to turn to. The police, despite their best efforts, couldn't protect me from the mind games he was playing. And the people in my life had started to doubt me, thinking I was unraveling at the seams. My paranoia was becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. By the end of the week, I stopped answering my phone. I couldn't bring myself to look at the messages anymore to hear his voice on the other end of the line. But as the days passed, I realized something even worse. He didn't need to speak to me anymore. He was everywhere now, in every reflection, every corner of my apartment, every unfamiliar face in the street. I felt his presence, watching, waiting, silent. I had become the prey in a game that had no end, no escape. And worst of all, I knew he wasn't done with me yet. It was only a matter of time before the next phase began. It for a long time, trying to convince myself that I was just tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me. The flower looked so out of place, so impossibly fresh, that it felt wrong. There was no way anyone could have gotten into the bar unnoticed. The door was locked, and the night had been silent. I should have felt comforted that the man had left, but instead I felt an undeniable sense of dread creeping up my spine. I pushed the lily away, but its presence seemed to linger like a shadow that refused to fade. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in the air, that the bar was no longer just a place where I worked. It felt like it had become something else, entirely. Alive almost, a presence intangible yet heavy. The rest of the night passed in a haze. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, constantly checking corners I hadn't noticed before. But the stranger didn't return, and the bar remained empty. When my shift finally ended, I cleaned up quickly, not wanting to be in the space any longer than necessary. I locked up and stepped out into the cold night, the scent of the lily still hanging in my senses like a ghost. The next night, the same thing happened. I was wiping down the counter, lost in my tired thoughts, when I noticed the shift in the atmosphere. The bar seemed different. And then, just as before, he appeared. This time, I tried to ignore him. I kept my eyes focused on my work, convinced that if I didn't acknowledge him, he'd go away. But when I finally dared to glance up there, he was just like the night before, standing in the shadows, watching me. Again, he ordered a Coca-Cola no ice and placed a white lily on the bar between us. His movements were smooth, deliberate, and he didn't speak a word beyond the initial request. I filled the glass, mechanically, my hand shaking as I tried to steady it. I couldn't look away from the flower. It was the same, but this time it seemed different. The petals, though pristine, now held a faint shimmer, as though they were slightly glowing under the dim light. The silence between us stretched longer this time, thick with tension. I felt the same sense of unease creeping over me. My throat was dry, my heart beating louder than usual. When he finished his drink, he left exactly the same amount of change as before, nodded once, and walked back into the shadows. I waited until I heard the door close before I dared to move. But this time, something had changed. I couldn't quite explain it, but the air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me. The lily was gone. I looked around the bar, half expecting to see the man, still standing in the shadows, but there was no sign of him. I walked to the bar and saw, to my horror, that the lily had not simply disappeared, it had withered. Its petals had darkened, shriveled up, and now lay on the bar, like the remnants of something long dead. A chill ran through me, as I stood there staring at the flower. It wasn't just a flower anymore. It felt like a symbol of something much darker, something far older that had found its way into my life without me even noticing. Sharp relief against the cracked pavement. The shadows stretched unnaturally, forming frozen images of the night as though the world had been captured in a moment of time that refused to release its grip. I stepped back, my body trembling as I absorbed the impossible scene before me. There were no moving shadows, no soft gradations of light and dark, just these stark, permanent imprints of the world, as it had been a moment ago. I glanced at the sky, half expecting the sun to reappear. But the light remained muted, the evening still too oppressive, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath along with me. The silence around me deepened. Even the distant hum of traffic from the nearby streets had stopped, leaving only the sound of my own quickened breathing. A gut-wrenching realization began to claw its way through my thoughts. This wasn't just a strange visual effect. This was something different. The shadows weren't real anymore. They were Echo's impressions, like the world had been momentarily frozen, trapped in a past that couldn't be undone. I looked back down at the shadow burn on the ground, then at the rest of the court, where other shadows lingered unyielding, like a photographic imprint left behind on a dying memory. My legs shook with the sudden urge to run, but there was no way to escape it. I had been here too long, standing on this court, alone in this eerie stillness. As I turned to leave, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. At the very edge of the shadow, just beyond the burned outline of the tree, something faintly shimmered. At first, it was barely perceptible, a mere distortion in the air. But then it grew more defined, a shape materializing from the air itself. So I took a step back. The figure standing just inside the edge of the shadow was too vague to define, but it was there, undeniably there. It had no face, no body, just a presence that bent the air around it. And it was watching me. The very sensation of being seen by something that wasn't truly human made my blood run cold. I wanted to scream, to shout, to run. But the white nothingness from earlier, the pressure of the heavy silence, held me in place. The presence didn't move. It simply was an absence made real. Then as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished, evaporating into the air, leaving behind nothing but the eerie, unnatural chill that had settled in the air around me. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I was paralyzed by the weight of what had just happened. The court was, as it had been before, the same cracks in the asphalt, the rusting hoop, and the unnatural shadows burned into the ground like some impossible mark. The night had returned to its oppressive, suffocating silence. But I knew with a bone-deep certainty that whatever had just happened was only the beginning. I turned quickly and left the court, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing with impossible thoughts. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave. It clung to me like a second skin, lingering even as I reached the safety of my car. The drive back home was a blur of fearful glances in the rearview mirror, every dark street corner feeling like a place where eyes waited for me. Something had crossed the threshold tonight. Something had left its mark, and it wasn't ready to let go. When I reached home, I locked the doors and drew the curtains, trying to shut the world out. But I couldn't shake the sensation. It was still there, watching, waiting. And I knew deep down it wasn't finished with me yet. And the seams of reality start to unravel. I still catch myself looking at the shadows differently, questioning what might be lurking just beyond them. What other gaps in the fabric of space and time are waiting to be noticed. And though I've tried to move on, a small part of me remains forever tethered to that moment on the basketball court, to the strange echo of a world that shouldn't have been. The truth I now realize is that reality is far more fragile than we believe. A single flash, a crack in the veil, and everything we know can shift. It makes you wonder how much of the world around us is truly real, and how much of it is simply held together by our collective disbelief. I sometimes still hear the faintest echo of footsteps in the distance, a coldness in the air that shouldn't be there. But I don't go looking for answers anymore. Some things, some truths, are too terrifying to truly understand. And sometimes the best way to preserve your sanity is simply to walk away and pretend that the shadows are just shadows and nothing more. But as I sit here in the quiet of my room, I can't help but think, what if the door never fully closed? What if somewhere just beyond the edge of our perception, something is still watching, waiting and wandering through worlds it can never belong to? Some doors once opened can never be fully shut. And that thought lingers with me like the shadow of something I can't quite grasp. My pulse was a drumbeat in my ears as I forced myself to run again, despite the sharp pain in my leg. The ground was uneven, and every step seemed to take more energy than the last. The trees blurred past me, and the world felt both too vast and too close, like the forest was swallowing me whole. Then I saw a small clearing ahead, just enough space to break through the dense thicket. I pushed forward, my legs shaking as I stumbled into the open. The moment I crossed into the clearing, I stopped breathless and wild-eyed. The space around me was eerily still. The silence was oppressive, and I knew deep down that I wasn't alone anymore. I barely had time to react when a shadow moved between the trees at the far edge of the clearing. A figure emerged, tall and thin, cloaked in the shadow. They were too still, too silent, their presence too unnatural. My heart lurched in my chest. I backed away instinctively, the forest around me, now suffocatingly silent. The figure didn't move. They simply watched me, their face obscured by the shadows of their hood. The only thing I could make out were their eyes, cold, calculating, and unnervingly aware of my every move. Before I could think, my survival instincts kicked in. I turned and ran, not bothering to look back. My legs carried me forward with a new burst of adrenaline, but I could feel them getting heavier with each step. The sound of the forest seemed to come alive again. Branches snapping underfoot, the rush of wind through the trees. But the footsteps behind me didn't stop. They were still there, just a breath away. I heard a soft voice, distorted by distance but clear enough to reach my ears. "You can't outrun what you've already seen." The words sent a cold shiver through my spine. They weren't just chasing me, they were playing with me, toying with my fear. I stumbled over roots, losing my balance, but I couldn't afford to slow down. The forest felt alive now, not in the comforting way it used to, but like it was conspiring to keep me trapped. I found myself in another clearing, but this time something was different. The air seemed thicker, as if the very atmosphere was pressing in on me, suffocating any remaining thoughts of escape. I spun around, trying to get my bearings, but I only saw trees. Endless, towering trees. Then I heard it again. Footsteps not behind me, but around me. Circling. They were surrounding me. And I wasn't alone anymore. The figure was still there, just out of my sight. But I could feel their presence. I knew they were close. Panic surged within me, and I glanced down at my feet. The ground was uneven, the shadows playing tricks on my mind. My hands trembled, and I reached into my backpack for something, anything, that could give me an advantage. But the only thing I found was my flashlight. It felt like nothing compared to the terror closing in on me. Suddenly, the forest seemed to shift, as if reality itself was distorting. The trees groaned as they twisted in unnatural ways. The figures stepped forward, their outline clearer now, and they spoke again, their voice cold and controlled. It's not about the trail anymore. You're lost and you'll never leave. And the weight of their words hit me like a physical blow. I was trapped. There was no escaping this. The forest wasn't just a place, it had become a part of whatever hunted me, and I had become part of its story. My mind raced. I had to do something, anything. I couldn't let them win. I couldn't become another forgotten soul in this cursed place. And then, just as I thought I would lose all hope, I heard a familiar sound in the distance, a helicopter. The faint thud of blades cutting through the thick air. I turned toward the sound, the only thing that could get me out of here, and ran with everything I had left. The figure's presence faded, their words trailing behind me like an echo, but I didn't look back. The chopper was my only chance. Every muscle screamed, every breath was ragged and desperate, but I kept pushing forward toward the distant sound of salvation. I broke through the trees, the clearing now just a memory, and saw the helicopter hovering above the ground crew, waving to me. I collapsed into the arms of a rescuer, my legs finally giving out beneath me. As the helicopter lifted off, I couldn't stop shaking. I had survived barely, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever had chased me through that forest wasn't done with me. It had let me go for a reason. I glanced back out of the helicopter's window eyes, scanning the darkening forest. A chill ran down my spine as I thought of the figure still waiting somewhere out there, biding its time. The woods weren't done with me yet, and I couldn't escape them, no matter how far I ran.